the last day of death row inmate Christa Pike, Tennessee's first female execution in 200 years? At 5:19 a.m., the lights switch on inside Tennessee's death row for women. The routine is quiet, controlled, measured. Inside one of those cells sits Christa Gale Pike, a woman who was barely old enough to vote when a jury decided she deserved to die. Now, decades later, the date is set. If the execution moves forward, Tennessee will carry out something it hasn't done in nearly 2 centuries: execute a woman. But this story doesn't begin with a death warrant. It begins with a childhood marked by instability, a teenage obsession that spiraled out of control, a cold January night in 1995, and a classmate who believed she was walking into a conversation, not a trap. To understand how Christa Pike became one of the youngest women ever sentenced to death in modern American history, you have to start long before the prison walls. Long before her name became linked to one of Tennessee's most notorious murder cases, Christa Gale Pike's life was marked by instability from the very beginning. Born in 1976 in West Virginia, she entered the world prematurely and into a household that relatives later described as volatile and unpredictable. Her parents' relationship was turbulent, filled with separations, reconciliations, and frequent conflict. Stability was rare. Consistency was even rarer. Family members would later say that basic care sometimes fell to extended relatives. Christa reportedly suffered from seizures as a child, but long-term medical or psychological support was inconsistent. Her mother's lifestyle was described as erratic, and Christa often moved between caregivers. The one constant figure in her early years was her paternal grandmother. To Christa, this woman represented safety, structure in a life that otherwise felt chaotic. When her grandmother died, that fragile sense of security disappeared. After that loss, Christa's behavior reportedly shifted. There were early signs of emotional distress. Accounts surfaced of self-harm attempts while she was still young. She spent brief periods in psychiatric care, but nothing sustained. There was no long-term treatment plan. Instead, she bounced between homes and schools, never staying long enough to feel grounded. As she entered her teenage years, instability deepened. She claimed to have endured harm during childhood, though some relatives later challenged her credibility, calling her prone to exaggeration or fabrication. Whether those claims were true or not, what is clear is that Christa's adolescence was defined by alienation. She struggled academically, despite early intelligence. She fought with peers. She changed schools repeatedly. Eventually, she was placed in a juvenile facility. That placement introduced her to structure for the first time in years. Through the Job Corps program in Knoxville, Tennessee, Christa found a path that looked promising. She earned her GED. She talked about becoming a nursing assistant. For the first time, there was talk of a future that didn't involve crisis. At Job Corps, she met Totterell Shipp. He was younger, and their relationship intensified quickly. What started as teenage attraction grew into emotional dependency. Friends later described Christa as possessive and deeply invested in the relationship. Together, they began gravitating toward darker themes: symbolism, rebellion, and a desire to stand apart from others. Some observers dismissed it as teenage experimentation. Others saw a shift in Christa's personality. She became increasingly paranoid about losing Shipp's attention. That paranoia centered on one person, Colleen Slemmer. Colleen was a fellow Job Corps student. She was outgoing, social, and generally well-liked. According to Christa, Colleen was trying to interfere in her relationship with Shipp. Friends of Colleen strongly denied any romantic involvement between Colleen and Shipp. But in Christa's mind, the threat was real. Suspicion became fixation. On January 12, 1995, Christa, Shipp, and another student, Shadola Peterson, signed out of their dormitory with Colleen. The outing was presented as an opportunity to talk things through, to resolve tension. Colleen agreed to go. They walked toward an isolated wooded area near an abandoned steam plant not far from campus. Colleen believed she was going to have a conversation. Instead, she entered a setting that had already been chosen for its privacy. What happened next was not a sudden burst of rage. Testimony later described an attack that unfolded over an extended period. There was taunting, there was restraint, there were acts described as deliberate and symbolic. Investigators later said the level of violence shocked even experienced officers. Colleen Slemmer lost her life that night. She was 19 years old. After the attack, Christa did something that would define public perception of her case for decades. She removed a small piece of Colleen's skull and kept it. Within hours, suspicion began to focus on the group. Dormitory records showed 4 students signing out and only 3 returning. When questioned, inconsistencies appeared in their stories. Eventually, authorities searched Christa and discovered the piece of skull in her possession. She confessed. However, she attempted to portray the events as something that spiraled beyond intention. Investigators did not accept that characterization. They argued the evidence pointed to planning and sustained violence. Christa Pike was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy. Her trial took place in 1996. Prosecutors emphasized the duration and nature of the attack, arguing that it demonstrated clear intent. The defense pointed to her chaotic upbringing and emotional instability. They highlighted her age, just 18 at the time of the crime, and argued that she had been shaped by trauma and neglect. The jury deliberated only a few hours before returning a guilty verdict. In March 1996, Christa was sentenced to death. She was 20 years old when the sentence was formally imposed, making her one of the youngest women in modern American history to receive a death sentence. The disparity between her sentence and those of her accomplices drew immediate attention. Tataryle Shipp received a life sentence with the possibility of parole. Shadola Peterson received probation after testifying against Christa. Christa, the youngest of the 3, received the harshest punishment available. Public debate intensified. Some viewed the sentence as justified given the brutality of the crime. Others questioned whether her background and mental health history had been fully considered. Her time on death row did not quiet the controversy. In 2001, Christa was involved in another violent incident inside prison. She attacked a fellow inmate using a makeshift cord in what authorities described as an attempt to strangle her. The victim survived after intervention. Christa was later convicted of attempted first-degree murder and received an additional 25-year sentence. For critics, the incident reinforced the perception that she remained dangerous. For supporters, it raised concerns about untreated mental illness and the psychological strain of death row confinement. Years turned into decades. Christa's legal journey was marked by appeals, reversals, and renewed filings. At one point, she requested to drop her appeals entirely and proceed with execution. Later, she changed her mind and resumed legal challenges. Her attorneys argued ineffective counsel. They argued that mitigating evidence about her mental health had not been adequately presented. They raised constitutional questions. Courts reviewed each claim. Each was ultimately rejected. In 2012, another controversy emerged. Authorities uncovered a prison escape plan involving a man who had formed a relationship with Christa through correspondence. A corrections officer was implicated in discussions about potential assistance. The plan was disrupted before it progressed. Christa herself was not charged in connection with the scheme, and officials later stated it was unclear how deeply she had been involved. Still, the episode added to her notoriety. Meanwhile, the memory of Colleen Slemmer remained central. Colleen had been 19, a teenager with plans and friendships and a future that ended in the woods that night. Her family continued to attend hearings and speak publicly about their loss. As the years passed, Tennessee had not executed a woman in nearly 2 centuries. Christa Pike's case became symbolic, not only because of the crime itself, but because of what her execution would represent historically. In September 2025, after decades of litigation, a death warrant was signed. Her execution was scheduled for September 30th, 2026. By then, Christa would have spent over 30 years behind bars for a crime committed at 18. Her case continues to divide public opinion. Some view the scheduled execution as justice long delayed. Others see it as the final chapter in a life shaped by instability, untreated trauma, and a system that intervened too late. What remains undisputed is that on a cold January night in 1995, a confrontation fueled by jealousy and obsession ended in irreversible tragedy. A teenage fixation, a calculated decision to isolate someone in the woods, an act of violence that stunned a community, and a sentence that would follow Christa Gale Pike for the rest of her life. Nearly 3 decades have passed since that cold January night, but the impact of this case has never truly faded. For some, this is justice long overdue. For others, is a tragic ending to a life shaped by instability and untreated mental illness. What remains undeniable is this: one decision, made in youth, altered countless lives forever, and its consequences still echo today.